Top 5 most powerful empires in history. Top 5. Spanish Empire. The Spanish Empire was the first empire to operate on a truly global scale, integrating Europe, the Americas, and Asia into a single economic system. Its expansion accelerated after 1492, when Castile initiated transatlantic exploration that quickly evolved into large-scale conquest. The collapse of the Aztec 1521 and Inca 1533 empires was not simply a result of Spanish military superiority. It involved alliances with indigenous rivals and, more decisively, demographic collapse caused by Eurasian diseases such as smallpox. In many regions, population losses exceeded 50%, severely weakening resistance structures. The foundation of Spanish power was silver extraction. Mines in Potosí and Zacatecas produced the majority of the world's silver during the 16th and 17th centuries, with estimates ranging from 70% to 80% of global output. This silver flowed into Europe and, crucially, into Asia, particularly Ming China, where it was absorbed into an already monetized economy. Spain established a continuous transoceanic trade system through the Manila galleons, linking the Americas directly to the Philippines. This created a stable exchange of silver for Asian goods such as silk and porcelain, effectively forming one of the earliest global trade networks. However, this wealth created structural weaknesses. The Spanish economy became dependent on imported bullion rather than domestic production. The resulting inflation, known as the price revolution, eroded purchasing power and reduced long-term economic stability. Spain increasingly relied on manufactured goods from more productive economies, such as the Netherlands and England. Militarily and politically, the empire was overstretched. Continuous wars in Europe and administrative inefficiencies across distant colonies reduced central control. By the 19th century, independence movements across Latin America dismantled most of Spain's territorial holdings. Despite its decline, the Spanish Empire permanently altered global demographics, trade patterns, and cultural structures. Its significance lies not only in its scale, but in initiating sustained intercontinental economic integration. Top 4. Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire was one of the most durable imperial systems in history, lasting from the late 13th century until 1922. Its strength was not based on rapid expansion alone, but on long-term administrative stability and control over critical geographic choke points. The capture of Constantinople in 1453 transformed the empire into a central power between Europe and Asia. Renamed Istanbul, the city became both the political capital and a key hub in Eurasian trade. Ottoman control over the Bosporus and Dardanelles allowed it to regulate maritime access between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. At its peak, the empire controlled roughly 5 to 6 million square kilometers across Southeast Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. More important than its size was its position. It sat directly on major land and sea trade routes, extracting revenue through taxation and transit control. The Ottoman administrative system combined centralized authority with local autonomy. Through the millet system, religious communities such as Christians and Jews were allowed to manage internal affairs under imperial supervision. This reduced resistance and enabled long-term governance over diverse populations. Militarily, the empire relied on a professional standing force, including the Janissaries, who were initially recruited through the Devshirme system. Combined with early adoption of gunpowder weapons, this gave the Ottomans a sustained advantage during their expansion phase. However, its strategic advantage declined after European maritime powers bypassed overland trade routes by sailing around Africa. From the 17th century onward, the empire faced increasing military pressure from the Habsburgs, Russia, and Persia. While internal institutions became more rigid and resistant to reform, Attempts at modernization in the 19th century were insufficient to reverse structural decline. Following defeat in World War I, the empire was dismantled, marking the end of one of the longest-lasting imperial systems in history. Its legacy remains visible in the political and cultural structures of the Balkans and the Middle East, particularly in borders, governance models, and religious dynamics. Top 3. Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was not the largest in territorial terms, but it was one of the most structurally influential. At its peak, around 117 CE, it controlled roughly 5 million square kilometers and governed an estimated 60 to 70 million people, close to 20% of the global population at the time. Rome's expansion was systematic. It combined military conquest with integration, incorporating local elites and extending citizenship over time. This reduced resistance and allowed long-term control across diverse regions. The Edict of Caracalla in 212 CE granted citizenship to nearly all free inhabitants, further consolidating internal cohesion. Its military was highly organized. Roman legions were standardized, disciplined, and supported by an extensive logistical network. The empire built over 400,000 kilometers of roads, enabling rapid troop movement, communication, and administrative control across vast territories. Economically, Rome functioned as an interconnected system. Different regions specialized in production. Egypt and North Africa supplied grain, while provinces like Hispania provided metals. A common currency and internal security, especially during the Pax Romana, facilitated trade and economic stability. Roman law was one of its most significant contributions. It established frameworks for property, contracts, and civil administration that continue to influence modern legal systems. Unlike many empires, Rome built institutions designed to persist beyond individual rulers. From the 3rd century onward, the empire faced increasing instability. Political fragmentation, rising military costs, and external invasions weakened central authority. Reforms under Diocletian and Constantine attempted to stabilize the system by dividing administration and restructuring governance. The Western Roman Empire collapsed in 476 CE after prolonged decline, not a single event. Economic contraction, loss of territorial control, and reliance on external military forces contributed to its fall. Top 2. Mongol Empire. The Mongol Empire was the largest contiguous land empire in history, reaching approximately 24 million square kilometers in the 13th century. Its defining characteristic was not longevity, but the speed and efficiency of its expansion under Genghis Khan and his successors. The empire originated in the unification of Mongol tribes in 1206. Genghis Khan replaced tribal divisions with a merit-based military structure, organizing forces into a decimal system, units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000. This created flexible command and high operational coordination. Mongol military strength was based on mobility. Mounted archers could travel long distances rapidly, often managing multiple horses per soldier. This allowed sustained campaigns across vast territories without traditional supply constraints. Communication was reinforced by the YAM system, a relay network that enabled fast transmission of orders and intelligence. Expansion was simultaneous in multiple directions. The Mongols conquered northern China, Central Asia, Persia, and advanced into Eastern Europe. Cities that resisted were often destroyed, while those that surrendered were integrated, creating a pattern of psychological warfare that reduced future resistance. The conquests caused significant population decline in several regions, particularly in Persia and parts of China. However, once control was established, the empire secured major trade routes, especially the Silk Road. This period, often referred to as the Pax Mongolica, allowed safer movement of goods, people, and knowledge across Eurasia. Unlike other empires, the Mongols did not build a centralized bureaucratic system of the same depth. After the death of Genghis Khan, the empire fragmented into separate khanates, including the Yuan dynasty in China and the Golden Horde in Eastern Europe. These regions operated independently, reducing long-term unity. By the 14th century, the empire had effectively dissolved as a single political entity. Internal divisions, geographic scale, and succession conflicts prevented sustained central control. Its long-term impact lies in connectivity rather than governance. The Mongol Empire re-established and secured transcontinental trade networks, accelerating exchanges between East and West and reshaping Eurasian interaction at a structural level. Top 1. British Empire. The British Empire was the largest empire in history, reaching approximately 35 million square kilometers and governing around 400 to 450 million people in the early 20th century. Its dominance was not based on territorial continuity, but on control of global trade routes, naval supremacy, and financial infrastructure. Expansion began through chartered companies, especially the East India Company, which combined commercial operations with military force. Over time, key regions were transferred to direct state control, particularly after the Indian Rebellion of 1857, when India became the central component of the empire. The Royal Navy was the foundation of British power. It secured maritime routes and enabled control over strategic choke points such as Gibraltar, the Suez Canal, the Cape of Good Hope, and Singapore. This network allowed Britain to maintain continuous global movement of goods, resources, and military forces. The empire was closely tied to the Industrial Revolution. Britain's industrial capacity enabled mass production, technological advancement, and military superiority. Colonies supplied raw materials such as cotton and rubber, while also serving as markets for manufactured goods, reinforcing a global economic system centered on British industry. Administratively, Britain used flexible governance models. Settler colonies like Canada and Australia developed self-governing systems, while regions such as India and parts of Africa were controlled through centralized or indirect rule. This adaptability reduced administrative costs across a highly diverse empire. London functioned as the global financial center. The pound sterling operated as a dominant international currency, and British institutions controlled investment, insurance, and trade financing. Economic influence extended beyond formal territorial control. Decline accelerated in the 20th century. The financial and military costs of World War I and World War II weakened Britain's capacity to sustain global dominance. At the same time, nationalist movements in colonies increased pressure for independence. Decolonization proceeded rapidly after 1945. India gained independence in 1947, followed by large-scale territorial losses across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. The empire transitioned into the Commonwealth, marking the end of centralized imperial control. Its legacy remains embedded in global systems. The widespread use of English, the influence of common law, and the structure of modern international trade and finance reflect the long-term impact of British imperial expansion.